Hello, I'm Matthew Bay, a senior analyst at Stratfor, a RANE company. This podcast is brought to you by Stratfor Worldview, RANE's premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence analysis. Sign up for the free Stratfor newsletter at worldview.stratfor.com.
Welcome to Stratfor Essential Geopolitics podcast from RANE. I'm Emily Donahue. Farmers in India have been protesting for months, demanding the government repeal laws that opened agricultural markets to private companies. In recent days, those protests have spread. With details, here's Bhumi Patel, Stratfor South Asia analyst at RANE. Hi, Bhumi. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just jump right in. Can you let me know what the latest update on the situation is today?
As you mentioned, Emily, the protests have been quite active since November of last year and reached what many would call its peak in February of this year, when violence broke out during clashes between protesters and police forces in the country's capital. At the time, it seemed as though the momentum would continue and demonstrations would escalate. But the unexpected second wave of the pandemic hindered the farmers' ability to gather in large numbers. Now, though, as the government has moved forward on its vaccination drive and lifted many restrictions, we have seen farmers begin to gather again. Just last week, farmers protested outside of the federal parliament building and promised to increase protest activities in the coming weeks.
Is there anything different about the protests this time around?
Well, I'd say the biggest change is arguably the fact that the Congress Party leaders, which is the ruling BJP's main political rival, have been the ones to organize most of the demonstrations. In fact, in a majority of the protests, farmers weren't even present. For the Congress Party, it makes sense politically because another round of assembly elections are coming up at the beginning of 2022. The results of the elections are going to be a significant indicator of the BJP's popularity ahead of the general elections in 2024. We've already seen the BJP's popularity falter after its response to both the protests and the pandemic. So this will be a good litmus test of whether or not that type of sentiment will carry forward in the long term. It's also a critical time for the Congress Party and many other opposition parties throughout the country as they try to gain the public support needed to mount a real challenge against the BJP in the polls.
Bhumi, hang on 1 second. We'll be right back. Bhumi, if farmers and politicians are continuing down this path of civil unrest, will they actually be successful in getting these farm laws repealed?
That's a great question, and I'm sure one that most people would like to be answered simply. Unfortunately, though, there is no simple answer because we have a couple of plausible scenarios that can play out. We know that the Congress Party decided to get more involved in the protests this time around because they've been working on creating an opposition party coalition consisting of non-BJP parties from all over the country. So putting on this image of caring deeply about the farmers helps in winning public support, which in turn leads to political support in elections. But their tactics, like repeatedly interrupting the current session of Parliament, does run the risk of hindering important laws from being passed. They may actually be beneficial to the groups they're looking to gain support from. So it really comes down to whether or not these types of protests are sustainable. And if not, what other methods could they use if they realize disrupting parliament sessions does more harm than good? The farmers, on the other hand, have the invaluable resource of time. Many farmers who either stopped attending protests because of the pandemic or to tend to their crops during the harvest season will now be returning. But with a third wave looming, it's unclear how much momentum they'll be able to amass and whether or not the BJP-led government will prioritize farm laws over pandemic response, even if the elections are only months away.
Well, that's a lot to keep our eyes on. Thanks for that guidance, Bhumi.
My pleasure, Emily.
Bhumi Patel is Stratfor South Asia analyst at RANE. Sign up for the free Worldview newsletter from RANE. We'll send you regular updates on South Asia geopolitics and much more. Find out more at worldview.stratfor.com. That's worldview.stratfor.com. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for listening.